housing, and this is the big. So, I had to take that because, yes. So, in my career, housing is been one of the biggest issues. So, there are four tentpole issues in the disability community: education, employment, healthcare, housing. Accessible, affordable housing is the phraseology. It's almost non-existent. In order to buy a house, you have to have the credit score and you have to have the down payment. But if the Social Security Administration says you can't have any more than $5,000 in the bank, how can then you have money to make a $40,000 down deposit or down payment or whatever? If you are ineligible for assets, how do you can't build credit? So housing, in terms of just getting into housing, is impossible, which is why the vast majority of young adults with disabilities who are looking for housing often end up in situations where either A, they're at home, or B, they're in the long-term care facility that is not the age appropriate. And depending on if they're neurodivergent or if they have IDD or if they have any other kind of things, then they're clustered in homes where people say, oh my God, see, this is their house, it's a group home, where they still don't have the autonomy at 40 to live. They just want to sit on the couch and watch Judge Judy and eat Cheetos. So the barrier to housing is real. The barrier to affordable housing is real. The housing crisis is real for people with disabilities, because even when you talk about new construction, the law, the ADA, which we'll touch on, has a provision that any new construction should have at least 10% of those units be accessible. And so, but then you look at people and go, I don't know if I want them people in my, it's implicit and explicit bias towards people with disabilities because the term liability becomes a thing. So I think the barriers to affordable, accessible housing are just that. It wouldn't be a barrier if I could get a job and pay market rate rent or be able to save money to buy a house. It wouldn't be a barrier if the housing policies weren't written in a way that means in order for me to stay here, I need to stay in a perpetual state of poverty in order to be housed. So it's a real crisis, it's a real issue. And what people don't talk about is the difference between urban, suburban, and rural access to affordable, accessible housing for people with disabilities. And if you are in a state where, if you're living on the Oregon coast versus living in Portland, versus living in Bend, versus you're living in Eugene, those are unique challenges. But again, if the barriers to your access are finances, availability, and again, if you're applying for an apartment, you're auditioning. And if somebody is ableist and doesn't like your human condition, then you won't be housed. Well, the solutions are, first of all, you have to scrap all these ridiculous housing policies that really were shaped and crafted around political agendas versus trying to solve the problem. When people talk about homelessness and they say, well, what is the solution? It's kind of in the title, right? Like if you take the less off and give them the home, then there it is. If you're talking about people with disabilities being able to house themselves, then if you're not going to change the income eligibility access points in terms of employment or monthly benefits or things like that, then you need to make sure that concerted efforts are built to have large-scale housing units put up, and not what they did in the 60s and 70s, where they did these huge projects like you see in New York or Chicago, where you stack people on top of each other. Do it in a more universally designed way. So the barriers to housing are how to remove them is you get architects to design houses so people can do stuff like age in place. So you don't, so the door is wide enough for your wheelchair to get in, or for your grandmama to come visit, and she ain't got to worry about whether or not her, again, if we can split atoms, put telescopes into space, and peer back to the beginning of time, then you can't be that stupid as to not be able to design a universally accessible house. And so it's a matter of will, and it's a matter of desire. But again, if people are comfortable in functioning in their prejudices and their biases, we're going to continue to have these issues.